Welcome back to Following Noah on a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 124, and we are covering part 4 of Rhythm of War still. Paul, how are you?
Excellent. Excited to get through part 4 some more. We've got some exciting stuff.
Yeah, we do. Elliot?
I'm doing good. A nice mix of some intriguing stuff, some straightforward stuff, some dramatic stuff. It's a well-rounded set of chapters this week.
We do have quite the mix today. We have present-day Venli, Navani, Bridge 4, Flashback Venli, and Adolin, all to cover in this episode. We've got 5 chapters, 83 through 87. Do you guys have 2 words to summarize the episode? We'll start with Elliot.
You know I do. My 2 words are ideal and irony.
Okay. Paul?
My 2 words are contempt and shoes.
Okay. Let's use these 4 words and continue into part 4 of Rhythm of War. Shoes? Tell me about shoes.
Can I tell you about contempt first?
Okay.
So both of these words are talking about some of the dads of our storyline.
Okay.
Contempt I'm actually using to talk about Lirin as more of a discussion point. I feel like we're starting to see where Lirin is like... We know there's been some weird stuff between Lirin and Kaladin now, and we're almost seeing, I feel like Lirin is kind of given up on Kaladin in a way, almost like holds some resentment or contempt towards Kaladin and his like choice to do what he's doing right now. And so that was why I chose that word, is kind of for that like storyline that's going on, that problem, if you will. Shoes, talking about our other a different father-son duo of Adolin and Dalinar. And that is talking about, I'm sure there's some better word or adage for this, but I was thinking about how Adolin has really big shoes to fill with Dalinar being your dad, the bondsmith. And I mean, we know about his past now and how that's not pretty, but we've seen how honorable Dalinar has become and how he's just one of my favorite characters by far. But we get some really cool Adolin things, and I'm kind of getting the feeling that we may see Adolin start to kind of fill in more of the mature, honorable parts of Dalinar that we see, and kind of fill into those roles as well as being like a great swordsman and a stylish young buck, kind of character.
Yep, I can get behind that. Elliot.
One of mine ties in directly to all of those points: Adolin, Dalinar, honor, and the word I picked was ideal. And I picked it because the trial scene seemed to, even from the get-go, hone in on arguing about the ideal state. And if humans make any flaw at all, is that justification to not bond with them? And so Adolin finds himself in this tough position where he's forced to try and defend the ideal versus flawed nature of humans. And then my second word was irony, and I picked it for a discussion between Eshonai and Venli that we have.
Okay.
But then also a bit for the trial that we see later, and Adolin kind of being stuck in this position of defending all of humankind when he has Shallan sitting right next to him as the kind of perfect example of all the lies and treachery that are possible. Treachery may not be the right word. We'll stick with lies. All the lies that are possible for a Radiant to commit. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I would go as far as treachery. Maybe just danger.
Yeah.
I mean, we can remember back to the Way of Kings content on our podcast where I pointed out that Shalon may have been our biggest villain that we had seen.
Ooh.
Or one of our biggest villains. So maybe we will revisit that, but you know.
All right. Jump right into 83. Lirin is, well, I'll lead with another name. Relaine comes to Lirin and says, Kaladin is unconscious. He's in a coma. We can't wake him up. Nothing we can do can save him. He's not involuntarily sucking in Stormlight, or at least maybe his Stormlight is not healing him as it has been. So they go to Lirin and they say, we need to heal him in traditional means. He needs surgery. And we enter the conversation, and Lirin is prepared to bring Kaladin down to the surgery room, and by doing that, he would give him up to the regal guards that are there in the surgery room. So he is not willing to go to Kaladin at first. He agrees to after Hasina steps in, but Lirin is real, as you said with your words, Paul. Lirin has a real issue with Kaladin and his stance. Kaladin's actions have led to people all over the tower causing some disturbances, putting Shosh glyphs on their foreheads as a sign of like quiet rebellion against the fused, and that's caused them to be beaten. And Lirin doesn't blame the people who put the Shosh glyphs on their forehead. He blames Kaladin for giving them the inspiration. He sees Kaladin as responsible for the unrest that's in the tower at the moment. So Lirin is prepared to give Kaladin up to maybe perhaps save more lives down the line, is how Lirin views it. What do you guys think of this conflict that's been developing over Rhythm of War here?
This chapter took Lirin too far for me.
Okay.
I so far have been willing to at least understand Lirin's position of pacifism, kind of a fairly extreme version of pacifism. Pacifism, sure.
Yes,
and that he actively wants to work with the oppressors. That in several instances he says that that's their job, is to basically maintain peace by helping them as much as they can, or at least where they can. But here in this scene, he's talking about going and finding his son and then intentionally going and turning him in, knowing full well they're probably just going to straight up execute him.
Yeah.
And that, I don't know. I don't see the defense of that particular stance. Going out of your way to track down the fugitive your enemy is looking for them, I can't see any reason to justify doing that. That seems like we're helping the enemy at that point.
I agree. I'm a little confused why we're seeing this and why this is. You know, we've seen Lirin in the past, and like I've been able to sympathize and understand his points of why a surgeon is so valuable and what's so important about being a surgeon, because we see that growing up, Kaladin wants to be a warrior like so badly. That's like his dream. And Lirin, his dad, offers the perspective of like there is honor in saving lives, not just taking them, if you will. There's honor in heroism, in the like, yeah, protecting lives and healing others, right? and that's something I can totally stand for. But this feels very ridiculous. This doesn't feel like the Lirin that I think I've known. We haven't seen much of him in a long time, but I still don't. I don't get it. I feel like maybe this has to be something that's like played up. The only purpose I can think of for this is something to be played up, so it spurs Kaladin to reach like the fourth ideal, or something like that.
Okay.
But other than that, I don't know why this. I don't know why Lirin's acting the way he is. You know.
So Lirin takes his perspective to the extreme of, I need to save as many lives as possible. Kaladin has and is killing people even though it's in the name of defense, he is still killing singers, killing fused, whatever. So Lirin takes that view to the extreme of, we need to eliminate Kaladin for the good of my worldview of save as many lives as possible. Question: does Brandon Sanderson take this character too far? Is this believable of a character that Lirin would turn in his own son for that worldview? Are you guys sold on it, or does it just throw you?
It throws me. I don't think it fits.
Okay.
I see the point that's trying to be made, but from what we've seen of these characters, like Lirin still felt like a normal man. Like he still felt like a normal guy. But he's a surgeon, and like he has I guess a different set of morals and ethics than a lot of our like common folk, common dark eyes and light eyes in Roshar. And I feel like that's what was pointed out and what was significant at the beginning of our story, because it was characters like him and like Dalinar that kind of made us raise our eyebrows of like, why are you doing this differently, and what cool thing is going to come from it? Like me as the reader, I was like, okay, Dalinar is really unpopular because of the way he does things, but there's going to be some fruit of this, right? And I feel like that's how a similar vein of how I thought about Lirin. But this doesn't feel like it fits in that for me.
Yeah, I have some similar thoughts. It's definitely seems like a different Lirin than the one we met back in Kaladin's hometown of Hearthstone.
Yeah.
I don't know that it completely breaks for me. I think it does work. And there was one line that helped it work for me. And that was where in this scene, Venli notices the spren that Lirin is attracting are not anger spren, which you might take this to be. You might take this as a direct like resentment of Kaladin. But instead, she notices specifically that they're fear spren, not anger spren, that are being attracted to Lirin. And so I took that as Lirin as a character is in a state of brokenness in a sense. He's been just thoroughly cowed by the oppression of the fused. And so I think he's acting out of fear and not idealism necessarily to his pacifism. So with that in mind, I buy it as a character. I don't like it in his character, but it works for me.
That makes sense. I do remember that line now that you mention it, and that made me really curious of like, how is that going to really come into play? What's the significance there, you know?
Yeah, Venli does realize that because those are fear spren, Lirin's emotions don't fully back up all of his claims. He still cares about his son, no matter what his principles are vocalized. So would Lirin actually go through with that? We don't get to find out, I guess. But so this chapter is actually from Venli's point of view. And by the end of the chapter, we have freed Lift. But via Venli's will shaper powers. Does she will shaper? Why can I never remember that? She via her will shaper powers, and she basically lies to everybody in this chapter on the different ways that she explains on how she's getting lift out. So she tells Dabid and Relaine that I'm going to get him out with a shard blade. And they're like, you have a shard blade? Okay, I guess. And then she walks up to the stone, puts her hands to it, and pulls the stone apart. And then Lift turns around from her cell, and she's really confused. And then she tells Lift, oh, I'm a fused. I have fused powers. And so Lift's like, okay. So she's still yet to tell anybody. And I wonder if that feeds into her not being able to say her ideal on the last line of the chapter. So back whenever we saw Lift before, Venli was like, who did she free? Relaine, I think. She frees Relaine in that chapter, and then it's like, oh, I will free those who are in bondage. And then she hears a female voice that says, then those words are not accepted. And then she tries again in this chapter, can I say the words yet? And Timber says, no, not yet. Even though she freed Lift, which was the assumption of that's what she needs to do. So what were you guys' thoughts on where Venli is here?
I do wish she would tell our heroes. I kind of get why she's not. I think she's still clinging to her own plan, which is run away, take as many as I can, and kind of refound the listeners, the Parshendi, who are kind of their own breakaway nation. So I think she's just still trying to cling to that and is not willing to give up. But man, it would really help our team here if she would tell them what she is. I did notice there was one lie that she made that if our characters are paying attention, they should be able to catch her on pretty quick. And I noticed it because it's one that kind of stumped us way back in Way of Kings, and it has to do with her shard blade.
Yeah.
And help me make sure I get all my facts straight here, but she's claiming that she found a shard blade or she has acquired one, like a shard bearer. That's not true, right? She's wielding her spren as a radiant blade. Now, the difference...
I don't even know if she's ever summoned Timber as a blade yet, but keep going.
Does she not in this scene?
Does she show them a blade?
I don't remember.
I don't
they
think
talk
so.
about it.
They do. I mean, I know a lot of this chapter was tied up with like her selling the lie that she's using a shard blade because that's believable for everyone else. She can't be like, I'm using my radiant powers, you know.
Right. I do agree that she... I remember that she claims, I've got a shard blade, I'll just go cut her out. But I'm not sure if she shows them a blade. Does she show Timber as a blade?
I don't think so. I don't remember that.
I'm trying to flip through the pages here, and I'm not seeing it. So she may not here, which will cover her, because I was thinking in my head, as soon as she summons that blade, then if someone's paying attention, they could notice whether there's a gemstone on the hilt or not. Right. Because that's the difference, right?
Yep.
Is the dead shard blades have a gemstone which you use to bond with it, whereas a radiant blade does not. So that would be a giveaway if someone were to notice, and if she actually summons it, which maybe she doesn't hear and they just talk about it.
Which, side note about dead shard blades, they're essentially a Fabrial, right? Of housing a dead spren instead of so soulcasters are a similar thing where they're imitating radiant powers with spren. Same with the shard blade. You're just imitating the shard blade with the dead spren. Anyway, keep going.
That was it. That was all my thoughts on it there. I hope she comes clean to the good guys here soon.
Well, now that you mentioned it, which I kind of forgot about, are like quote like normal shard blades have a gemstone on the hilt. Is that like so? Our shard blades basically are like knives that we get in the next chapter. It's like knife with the gemstone on the hilt that captures our spren or heralds or whatever.
I
Is that
appreciate
like a
the
weird origin.
I appreciate the parallel. No, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, but no.
Okay.
So we free Lift, and then Lift is about to run down the hallway away from Venli and just run like she knows how to. And Venli says, "No, hold on, wait. We need you to save Kaladin," which is what, if you want to get an edge dancer to do something, all you have to do is say, "Hey, we need a life to save," and then they're like, "I can't say no, literally cannot." So, and then we end the chapter with you can't say your ideal yet. So Venli is close to revealing herself to our heroes, I think, but she doesn't quite yet. So
I was pretty shocked how fast we saved Lift. There was kind of a buildup to that, and Lift had been in captivity for a while, at least kind of chapter count wise. She's kind of been, we knew she was captured, but we didn't know the details. I assumed that was going to be a fairly big plot point in the, last quarter of this book here. I thought they'd spend like multiple chapters trying to, bank heist style break into the, the prison and bust her out. And instead they free her in like 2 pages.
Yeah.
It's, hey, I know an edge dancer. Oh, over here? Okay. Cut a hole in the wall or reach a hole in the wall with your hands, pull Lift out, good to go. Okay. That was abrupt.
It's either in this chapter or 85, but Lift reveals that she lost her chicken. She briefly grabbed an AVR from somebody that Moraes was hunting in the tower. Do you remember that interlude? Moraes hunts some random dude in the tower. He's got the rings on his right hand that we've been tracking for a little while now. He had a red AVR. The Lift got a hold of the AVR for a second there, and then it flew off again. So Lift is on the lookout for her new chicken friend, but she doesn't have it with her. So
the only other thing I noted in this chapter was because it was from Venli's perspective, we got a little bit of kind of reflection from her towards the beginning of the chapter where she's kind of thinking about her role in all of this and her purpose. And she thinks about Odium specifically. And she points out an interesting flaw in kind of Odium's logic, I guess, or purpose or manifest. Odium claims to be passion. He claims to be all of the passions, raw emotion. That's what Odium says he is. But Venli notices that there's a key emotion missing, like intentionally missing from all these interactions with Odium, and that is love. She remembers this love that she had for her mother, her sister, she had a once mate. I forget what his name was.
Oh,
but
shoot.
Anyway, yeah, that one's going to bug me.
I should know that.
It'll come to me later. But she specifically realizes that those emotions are gone, or they kind of were drained out of her in this process of working with the Voidsbren that she was working with, and then kind of all this exposure directly to Odium. There was none of that, and so if Odium truly was all of the passion and emotion he claims to be, why is love removed from the equation? It seemed like a it seemed like a good reminder for me that odium is evil. You could potentially try and go down a thought path of trying to justify, oh, well, odium is just raw emotion. Like, well, yes, but also no.
Right. And we're seeing that with the flashback chapters that we're been getting the last couple episodes and this one, that the more she embraces Ulim and tries to find these Stormsprend, the less common ground she finds with Eshonai, the less care she has for her mother. The origin of trying to start all of that for her was save her mother. When is the last time she went and spent any time with her mother, or thought about it at all?
Yep.
All right, 84. Navani has been foiled by Raboniel, but they quickly found Warlight right after that, which piques Navani's interest enough to keep going. She even asks herself in this chapter, like, why am I not going to carry water? I should be not working with Raboniel at all. She's obviously tricked me multiple times with listening in on the sibling, etc., to the point where Navani you could argue that Navani is actively helping Raboniel in some aspects, but Navani cannot help herself because there is the enticement of the unknown, is what she says. There is science right in front of her to find, and she cannot help herself. She has to pursue it. And so she still claims that she's not not a scholar, but we'll see how that goes. She's looking for anti-light, or should I say more accurately, what she's actually looking for is anti-investiture. She doesn't really understand that, but that is what she's looking for. She's looking for the opposite of Stormlight, the opposite of Voidlight, but both of those are just investiture that's harnessed within light. So what she's really looking for is anti-investiture, and that's what we assume Raboniel is looking for as well. So what'd you guys get out of this chapter?
So that made me instantly think, once we got this mention of like negative or anti-light, I was like, okay, what would that do? Right? It would like consume light, right?
Mm-hmm.
So instantly I thought of Nightblood. I also thought of our sphere, but we haven't like seen evidence of it entirely. But I mean, it seems similar-ish or weirdish enough for it to make sense. But this instantly just made me think of Nightblood. It made me think that maybe that's the key to, I don't know how you make this anti-investiture yet, but something that just like eats investiture, and that is exactly what Nightblood does. He just sucks away at whatever Stormlight you have, like endlessly. So, I mean, I feel like that's got to be the key to like using that to like take down Odium or others, right?
Nightblood's not even in this chapter at all, or hasn't even been in
Correct.
part 4. But
Correct.
I do want to pause here because we've brought Nightblood up a couple times in relation to anti-investiture. Are you guys confident enough to place him in that category, or is there still question mark? Like, obviously there's a couple question marks there of if you're completely sure, but are you confident enough to place him there, or is he just another type of investiture that we haven't seen yet?
We haven't seen any other mention of Dawn Shards, which I didn't think was Nightblood. I did not think Nightblood was a Dawn Shard anymore, but I'm wondering what we have a couple unknown items And at some point, I feel like they need to become known items or understood items. And I can't think of anything that makes more sense than this being like anti-light, anti-investiture. And that meaning like it's completely different from our other lights. It's not just like, oh, it's a combination of this light and that light, or all three lights, but it is like it is the consumer of these lights, I guess.
And its relationship to
I would confidently say that.
I do think Nightblood is a key piece of this puzzle, I think.
So does
I'm very
Tervansion.
curious. Yes, which makes me even more, want to know, of course. The key for me is going to be, is this anti-light, is it investiture or is it the opposite of investiture? That seems like a key piece for me. And then, you can then translate that question over to Nightblood. Is Nightblood just another type of investiture, or is he this anti-light that we're going after? I'm with Paul here in that my gut says maybe Nightblood is this investiture devouring thing, but in the back of my head I remember that very cryptic epigraph that we got a while back that seemed to almost hint at that Nightblood might be a shard.
Okay.
I do remember that. Yeah.
Do you remember that? It was
yes,
really vague.
I do remember that, and it was saying that it wasn't like one but two.
Yes.
And I got really excited, and I was like, "Holy smokes! Nightblood is 2 shards of Adonalsium or something." And then Trevor was like, "Nope, here's why it's not." And I was like, "Well, that's no fun."
Fully dissuade you. I did.
That's true, but it did present me with an option that is not actually the case.
And I know we spun a bunch of crazy, wild, improbable theories, all based on 4 words in an epigraph that was an excerpt of a letter that we don't even have the full story to. So a lot of assumptions feeding there, but that even the fact that we're having that discussion though about what could be powering Nightblood makes me still think there could be other options out there. That there's other explanations that Nightblood is something different still than just the anti-investiture that Navani is after. So I'm not sure yet.
Okay.
Fair.
Incoming minor spoilers for Secret Project 3 and the early chapters we got for that. Skip to 39:20 if you'd like to avoid them.
There is one thing that popped into my mind as we were having all this talk about inverse light. And Trevor, you may have to stop me here. So I'll talk slowly, but what it reminded me of was the excerpt from the Secret Project that we read before this book. Brandon had announced that he was apparently bored during COVID and wrote a billion books on the side and is going to be releasing them. But we read an excerpt of one of those.
Yep.
And I think there's a lot of folks that are intentionally avoiding reading those. So I don't want to go into necessarily the details of that because that's probably too spoilery for this forum. But the talk
you've
about
already crossed that threshold, but
yeah, well, I don't know. You might have to go back and edit me out, but I'll just say this: the discussion of light and an inverse light definitely sparked in my mind the discussions we had about the world we were on in that Secret Project. Maybe some interesting parallels there.
Yeah. At the moment, we're walking a fine line of, do I mark it as a spoiler or do I not?
Right.
I will go ahead and mark it as a full spoiler and just go ahead and talk about this. Secret Project 3. Okay. So, Nightmare Painter, I know it's been close to 6 months since we read this, but Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, there is 2 worlds that have seemingly been split or were together at one point is the implication. And then there is two types of investiture at work. There's like a teal one, and then there's a pink one that are on two
kind
separate
of a fuchsia.
Yeah, the two separate planets. They can see each other, but one's got a sun, one does not. One is super hot, one has no change in temperature at all. So the whole bunch of opposites. Yeah, I totally understand where you would pull that comparison, Elliot. I'm curious to know if that is it in that excerpt. It says virtuosity splintered herself. It names another what we assume to be a shard, where it's not confirmed. It's also not published, so that obviously could change. But it says virtuosity split herself, and so it's. I assume that it's two different types of investiture, as opposed to investiture A and negative investiture A. But I could be wrong.
And that was kind of I'm trying to remember back to that. Take two was that, yeah, we had different types of investiture going on there, but then we had some theories we spun about, is there a sun on one side and a black hole on the other side? Do we have this sort of mirrored thing going on? And if that's true, and you want to lean fully in on the inverse worlds, I was wondering if maybe we had some of this anti-investiture at work in that story we were reading. But yeah, we have so little there to go off of, right? So it's all just kind of crazy conjecture.
Well, I feel I should throw this out there since we're talking about this. This isn't. I don't remember if this was our last episode or 2 episodes ago, but not too long ago, I had a thought about that same secret project. I did not mention it because it wasn't. It was a lower tier of relevant for something that would, we didn't need to super dive into the secret project on the episode. But I'm wondering if it was maybe the Dog and the Dragon chapter. I just remember, or maybe it was an epigraph where Hoyd is referencing like a hotel or something, isn't it? Or some kind of like inn.
There is an inn that you cannot find on your own.
Yes.
But at the door there's a wheel.
Yes. That's what I was thinking of. And I instantly thought of, don't we see like an inn?
You see a noodle
Hoyd?
shop.
Yes. In my head, we saw an inn with Hoyd, or reference to Hoyd.
Hoyd
is that secret project.
Yes, Hoyd is the coat hanger. And
yes, that's right. Of course.
Design is the bartender. Design is the bartender behind the bar, and she has what you assume to be a light weaving of, she's an attractive young waitress, and she's the waitress at Yumi's noodle shop. Mm-hmm. Yes, so the only thing that I would say would disconnect those two would be, I would assume that happens after Stormlight, or at least the first cycle of Stormlight. So I don't think the Dog and the Dragon would originate from Secret Project 3.
I thought so too. That's why I didn't even mention it before, because I was like, I think the odds of this actually being a thing is remarkably low and not that tangible. But it was one of my thoughts. So while we brought it up, I wanted to point that out.
I do think you guys are some of the only people that knew Design's name before going into Rhythm of War, because reading that, which the whole spoiling that reverse was pretty funny. Anything else for Secret Project 3 before we clip it?
I was just going to say, an end spoiler session on Secret Project 3.
All right, you all can come back now. Let's talk about the knife that you were talking about, Paul. So, At the end of Oathbringer, Moash is given a knife, and they say, and the Fuse say, "Go stab Yezrian, please, thank you."
You have to remind me.
And Moash, literally, no thoughts, just goes and stabs Yezrian and thinks to himself at the time, "Oh, I'm killing Yezrian. That's cool." and does not, no cares, no emotion, nothing. And these not, excuse me, these knives are explained as there's one metal on the outside, and then like there's a sliver of metal down the middle that is gold in color, and it's called rasium. So that this knife is made of two different metals. Rasium is supplied to Navani because she asked for it from Raboniel, and Navani is doing some experiments with it, but Raboniel gives her some explanation on the mechanics of this knife. Elliot, do you remember the explanation there?
She talks about it being able to draw out and capture souls and
Yeah.
spren, and basically I walked away thinking of that now as our conductor material, whereas our other one, Raukalest, is kind of the insulator. That's the
Yeah.
one that prevents investiture from working. This one is the opposite. This one conducts investiture, and they can use it to capture spren.
What is the name of the metal spark for you?
Rays, like odium.
Yes.
That's exactly what I thought.
The name of the character behind odium, the vessel of odium, his name is Rays. So that would imply that the metal is at least named after him, if not invented by him. Maybe an alloy of a couple different metals that can do this, because we know that aluminum has special cool properties when interacting with investiture. You could also assume that you could make a metal that could do other cool stuff with investiture, and Rays has found that out. So I will touch on this, if not next week, but the week after, because these have to do with our epigraphs that have been coming through. Have you guys noticed our epigraphs and who they are from and why they're relevant?
Seems to possibly be herald related, has been my thought.
Okay. I'll probably talk about this more next week, and I'll string them all together once we have almost all of them. We can talk about cause it's relevant shortly. So we'll revisit this. One thing that happens in this chapter, though, Navani takes a flame spren out of a Fabrial. Is it a flame spren? Takes some sort of spren out of a Fabrial, puts it into the knife, and then, not, without even thinking, moves the other spren, moves like the other piece of paper. Is it a span reed? I think it's a span reed. Moves the span reed, and the knife moves with the conjoined Fabrial. It's still conjoined. What are the implications here? Navani's and Raboniel's brains go crazy as soon as they realize what just happened.
So it seemed to me that the reason why Navani and Raboniel are so surprised is not necessarily that they stayed conjoined, because that seems to follow the same laws we've seen with other conjoined fabrials. If you split a spren, it's in one half of a gemstone, it does what the other half does. The difference was now they had them in gemstones of fairly significantly different sizes. And so when she moved the large gemstone a small distance, the small gemstone in the dagger moved a large distance. And so
Yeah.
that could have some interesting, uses that I'm sure Navani's engineer brain was already spinning on. I did have a brief engineer explain thought explanation
Yes,
on
please.
this one, complete with the drawing that you poor Spotify and audio only listeners out there will not be able to appreciate. But if you're watching on YouTube, I did draw up a little diagram because Navani even mentions I think she references conservation of energy in this, and that basically if you're taking a large amount, moving it a short distance, the small amount moves a larger distance. I actually thought of conservation of mass and how it applies to hydraulics. And I have to draw up a diagram for this because it doesn't make a ton of sense just trying to explain it. But basically, what I thought back to is my fluid dynamics course that I had taken, which explains hydraulics in this manner. Basically, if you take a large surface area like here and put a fluid behind it, and you push that large surface area, slowly or a small distance, but then on the other end of your fluid, you have a small surface area, all connected to that same fluid. When you're pushing that large amount of fluid a short distance, the small amount of fluid on the other end moves a large distance because it has to displace and move the same amount of water or fluid that your large surface area is pushing. And so this is basically what Navani's new Fabrial is doing. She takes the big gemstone a small bit, and the small gemstone is forced to conserve that energy or mass, however you want to think about it, and moves the large distance. So I thought it was pretty cool. Took me back to my college days.
There we go.
So
I learned something new I never expected to learn every podcast.
So with their Iron Man gauntlet that they have, they could create a hydraulic press, is what you're saying?
Oh, you could create all kinds of things. If nothing else,
Large hydraulic press even.
We could improve our Iron Man gauntlet pretty significantly by putting large gemstones on the stones that are falling down the shaft, right? So that those gemstones no longer have to move, larger distances. They have to move, if they could move shorter distances, and they'd push Kaladin with the small gemstone further.
Right.
That makes sense. So he could potentially go for longer. Maybe those stones would be able to push him further as they travel down the shaft.
You can move your fourth bridge faster too.
Yeah. Yep.
Nice.
Some cool stuff.
Anything else for 84?
Nope.
All right. So 85, we get a Dabid, our first ever. Yes.
Well, I was gonna say. Well, I was just gonna say I'm excited to. I would be happy to enter this chapter.
Go for it. All yours.
If you want. Okay. We get a chapter 85. We get our first, I guess, almost Dabid flashback. It's like the history of Dabid, a lesson on Dabid chapter. And I was wondering if we would get this or when or a lot of things, because I feel like I've been asked repeatedly now, what about Dabid for this or Dabid for that? And I'm like, we know who is Dabid. Like, I know who he is, but by name, I know he's part of Bridge 4, but he's been the least of the Bridge 4 members, if you will. We don't know much about him. He does not have much dialogue,
Right.
So he's been a more minor character. But this, we get kind of a brief summary of his backstory, which I felt was brief, but gave really good insight into who he is and his motivations for why we see him now. And so I thought this was a neat chapter. I don't think I have anything groundbreaking to share from this chapter, but it was really nice. It was helpful to learn about Dabid, I guess. Particularly, I liked how it portrayed his struggle to like it talked about how he would do things that, like, I guess you could say a quote normal person wouldn't do, and so it would worry people. Like he talks about how he put a rope around his neck because he wants to feel what baby Dabid felt, which, like, you're right. If someone sees you putting a rope around your neck, they're gonna make a big deal about it, And he didn't.
Yeah.
Yes, they did. He didn't want that. That's not what he wasn't trying to hurt himself or anything. But he thinks differently. He's kind of running at a different, like, a wavelength, I guess. And so it was neat to kind of get that perspective, I'd say.
It had not even occurred to me that Dabid's silence might be anything other than, battle shock that had happened to him. And so to have this drop on us, it's not like the hugest reveal ever, but for some reason it hit me pretty hard. I was like, wow, I was not prepared for that. So this was a really cool chapter for me, and it felt really important or impactful to kind of go back and get inside Dabid's head a little bit and watch his journey of struggle and being misunderstood and wanting to help, but just kind of, doing everything wrong. But then here in this chapter, to be the moment where Dabid is instrumental in bringing Lift to Kaladin and Teft and directly result in the healing, probably the saving of both of their lives. That was a big moment. That was so cool for Dabid to be the one that saves them both. Really, really cool.
Yeah. I agree. It kind of bothered me on first read that the plot required Dabid to step up, so he did. But this chapter also backs that up of, no, it was Dabid's decision, actually. All along, Dabid could talk and communicate, but he just chose not to. And so the whole convenient plot, the mute guy begins to speak when he's the only one left, like that kind of bothered me. But to know that this is a willing, you could even say sacrifice from Dabid, that he's sacrificing something by revealing that he can talk, makes it better to me, I think. The end of this chapter, or middle of the chapter, I guess, Lift heals both Kaladin and Teft. Teft wakes up and begins swearing and grumbling about where his clothes are and all that fun stuff. And he's all embarrassed because he assumes that, I guess, that he has once again fallen to his fire moss addiction, and he thinks this is yet another time that they're pulling him out of the gutter. So he's wakes up rather disgruntled. But the big takeaway there is Lift can wake up our radiance. That's really big news. If for only a short amount of time, we'll see. But Lift has the ability to wake up everybody, assuming that rule carries over.
Oh yeah, and that's huge, right? Because our only other way of getting our radiance back was going to be shutting down the tower or stopping whatever Raboniel did to start up that Fabrial that's shutting them all down. And that's a pretty tall order at this point. So if Lift can just heal them, that's really big.
Yeah. She can slide in there, wake everybody up, and cause some commotion. Anything else from this chapter for Dabid? All right. 86, we have a flashback chapter. And this one is interesting for a couple reasons. Venli has convinced herself that, yes, I've done the right thing in pursuing Stormform, regardless of Ulim's influence over me. We are about to become extinct as a listener group, and pursuing this form, they're in the middle of the war with the Alethi at this point, and pursuing this form is the only thing that is going to save us. But I want to back up for a second and pose this question. Why are they in this war in the first place? And we talked about this a little bit, of who actually instigated the assassination of Gavilar. Was it Eshonai, after seeing the spheres that Gavilar had? Was it Venli, after talking to Nail? Or was there another influencing party here? What actually got them in this situation of literally all of the listeners are dying to the Alethi?
I think we're left to believe. I've been trying to figure this out exactly what happened, and I think we're still missing a little bit of like what Venli did that night.
Right.
But I think I'm still of the belief that it was Eshonai who actually did it.
Yeah.
Who was the one who got Zeth, sent him on the mission, gave the command. But Venli may still have played a more active role in that than we think she might have. It's kind of where I'm at.
I would agree with you, but I think there is someone who intentionally had Eshonai see what she saw. I think somebody rolled. I think this entire war is a setup, whether that's from the Sons of Honor or
Yep.
Whoever, the right-handed ring people that we don't know about, which seem Zindweth seems to be in direct contact with Ulim at the time, and the whole implications of that can go, anywhere. You could theorize anything with that, but obviously somebody is using the listeners to get the fused back onto Roshar, and whether that's whose fault the war is still a question, I think.
Right.
So at this point, Venli is saying, yes, I'm doing the right thing. We need to get Stormforms to save my people, and uses the war to justify the actions. But somebody is pushing her to find this and that's why they instigated the war, to put the listeners in a position like this. So she also in this chapter has lost all sympathy for Eshonai and the lack of love that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, this was the part that we were referencing before. Of the chapter describes that the more and more times the army comes back, and the bravest of warriors are the ones that have fallen in battle. And Venli's thinking to herself, "Oh, okay, that's good. The ones that would, have enough courage to stand up to me are dying off. So, okay,
Yeah.
we're making progress here." It was like that was kind of a big moment for me. It was like, okay, wow, that's pretty far across the line.
Yep.
And then this is where it gets into one of my 2 words for the chapters of irony. First off, the whole just situation itself of the Parshendi are the people who, like, their entire existence has been built around the prevention of the fused returning.
Right.
They broke away from the fused and have spent hundreds of years, at least, maybe thousands, trying to preserve this culture of don't let that happen again. And then here's Venli undoing every little bit of that and making the Parshendi the conduit for the arrival of the fuse. They are doing everything necessary to bring about the return of the fused. And so the irony of that was pretty stark. And then it also played into the discussion that Eshonai and Venli get in together, where I find it interesting that Eshonai asks Venli, "Hey, can you discover for me like a diplomacy form? I want to talk to them, but war form is not the right mindset for me to be in to do this. Can you get me one that's good at talking to people?" And Venli's like, yeah, I'll work on it. But I found that ironic because later on, that's exactly what Venli will become.
Right.
When she enters into, I think they call it envoy form.
Envoy form, yep.
When she's
in Oathbringer.
Going around to all the... Yeah, exactly. When she's going around and kind of telling the story of the arrival of the fused and the Parshenni to everyone, that's exactly what Eshonai asked for. And in the end, Eshonai got storm form and died, and Venli got envoy form and lived.
Do you think that has anything to do with the fact that their character was switched, our POV character was switched? Because didn't Brandon Sanderson say he was going to have this be an Eshonai point of view book?
Yes, he was going to have the flashbacks be entirely Venli or entirely Eshonai, and he ended up just throwing them both in there for a reason that I will not reveal yet.
Okay.
But he did give a full reason, but he also said it was a spoiler of the end of Rhythm of War reason. So, anything else for 86? All right, 87. Great chapter. Adolin is on trial for the death of the honors, well, all of the Spren in the Recreants, but specifically the honor Spren, because the honor Spren care a lot more about themselves than they do, the cryptics or whatever. But Adolin is on trial, and day one of the trial is accusation day. All of the honor Spren get to pull 3 witnesses in front of Adolin, and they get to make their accusations against Adolin. What do we start with?
I'll just start by saying I loved the tension leading into this chapter. I was very caught up with and I was very engaged with what is going to happen here. What is going to go down? Is Adolin going to be able to make a stand here? Is he just going to get crushed? I'm also kind of on pins and needles of, is it actually Kalek that's up there at the top? Because where we left Shallan at, she was very strongly contemplating stabbing him with the dagger she has and replacing him with a light weaving and kind of turning, intentionally rigging the trial in Adolin's favor. So I'm sitting there like, trying to analyze everything he's saying. Like, is that something Kalek would say, or is that something Shallan would say? And I think, honestly, some of the ways that he talks did sound rather Shallan-ish, like rather, I don't know, quippy, or rather, I don't know, short.
It must just be a light weaver thing, because Hoyd is also a light weaver, right? Like, it must be.
We also know our heralds are just insane, right? So I couldn't quite tell, but there was a lot of tension in this chapter in a good way.
There was.
I did want to briefly, before we keep talking about this chapter, shout out to Ranksk for something rather strange, actually. Ranksk is a longtime listener of our podcast and has a YouTube channel where he does word puzzles like Wordle.
Yes.
Apparently, Kalek shares this hobby as well, or maybe he does. I wanted to read this little section of the chapter because I thought it was hilarious. They're like in the middle of the trial, and here's what this is Adolin's perspective. They waited for Kalek to call the next witness. The high judge instead spent a good 20 minutes writing in his notebook. Adolin just hoped the notes he was taking related to the testimony. He half expected that the herald was solving word puzzles, like the one Yasna enjoyed. So apparently Yasna and maybe Kalek like Wordle. So pretty cool and funny. Maybe.
Yep. I think that is evidence against Shallan being Kalek at this point in time, because I think Shallan would get bored with a something like that. So I think that's supposed to show that Kalek has no sense of time or urgency about anything that goes on in his life, because he's been around forever plus another forever. So I think that's just saying how crazy Kalek is.
Good point.
Witness number 1. What happens with witness number 1?
Witness number 1 is the Keeper of the Dead Eyes, right?
Yes.
It's the honor spren who is, because we learned before that lasting integrity like intentionally takes in dead eyes and tries to take care of them, or at least make sure they're not being run over as they blindly wander around. And yeah, I think it's a she spren that's kind of talking there. She tells a pretty strong story against Adolin, explaining how all of the honor spren were betrayed, and betrayed in the worst way by their, closest friend that they had a bond with. And so it was definitely not a good start for Adolin.
How would you rebut that if you were Adolin? It's a good argument. I don't know how you're like, but we're different though. Like,
I think the way Adolin does try and rebut it is probably the best way to go about that, of basically saying, yes, that did happen and is going to happen again, but not everyone is a betrayer of their spren. And if joining the cause is going to have some casualties, but will ultimately win the war against evil, it might be a cause worth fighting.
right.
And so, but basically saying, just because there's going to be casualties in a war is not the only reason why you should not join that war.
Yeah.
So he tried, but I definitely didn't seem like he was off to a good foot.
What about witness number 2?
I was going to talk about this one a little bit. Witness number 2. I don't remember who it is, or if it's someone notable in the spren world. But Witness 2 talks about, like, okay, if we're going to bond, why not bond the fused, since they're like the original people, they're like the rightful owners of this land, or of Roshar. They're the original inhabitants of Roshar. And this made me wonder, I don't know, the fact that this argument was brought up makes me feel, well, I feel like it's starting to show that our spren here don't actually care about any, like, defeating evil or doing anything good. It's just about surviving. Like, if we go with the fused, like, maybe they won't turn back on their oath or on their bond. So maybe that's the right choice for us. Like, it's about what will work for their bond, and so they don't get, and none of them get killed, rather than doing the right thing, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's always, and Adolin, like, probably talks about this, I think, at some point, of like, the spren, like, aren't that honorable. Like, it's kind of being shown that they're not very honorable, like we thought, at times.
And who this argument comes from, the speaker here, is actually fairly important, because it is not an honor spren. The idea of doing this is not an honor spren. This is, what's his face, the ink spren, who has been assigned to be Adolin's tutor to prepare him for this trial. We've seen him a couple times in these Adolin chapters.
Blended.
Yes. And
blended.
He's an ink spren, the same type of spren as Ivory, which is Yasna's spren, and he has the entirely utilitarian view of all of my friends died bonding radiance, so why not go bond fused and wipe the radiance off the face of the earth? That's his argument.
And he brings up that rather difficult argument that our characters had to face at the end of Oathbringer, right? Of realizing that the singers are the native race on Roshar and the humans are the interlopers. And so blended brings us back up and says, hey, they're the rightful owners of this land anyway. Adolin, though, responds here with, I think, something important, and that is he doesn't disagree with that because they're right. But what he points to is says, they might be the rightful inhabitants of this land, but odium is evil. And so standing up against odium is the right thing to do. And that is an important distinction in this conflict for me. We are not fighting against the singers necessarily. They are the original inhabitants. The humans are the Voidbringers, back to that whole spin on it, right? That whole twist. But odium is pretty unquestionably evil and should be fought against.
And this revelation, this line of thinking, is not the first time we've had this. Leshwi and Kaladin, not too long ago in the Well chapter, had this exact same dialogue, saying Leshwi tries to get Kaladin to surrender, and Kaladin says, I can't do that because odium is on your side. I can trust your honor, Leshwi, that you would treat me honorably if I surrendered. I cannot trust your betters because I bear the brands of odium's men on my forehead, referring to Amaram, and I cannot trust anything that odium is behind. But even though he could trust Leshwi. So yeah, I do think it's interesting that Adolin and Kaladin have come to the same conclusion on separate storylines.
Yeah. One thing I want to say about Witness 2, and then one thing I want to say about this whole scene as a whole, is with the point I made, which is not necessarily like 100% accurate, I would add, of like they're only doing this for their survival, right? Like they're saying basically we don't need to bond. If we were to bond, we would bond the fused, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But at least the whole like survival minded, not doing what's right, I would say is what Teravangian is. Of like, I'm going to do what will save my people.
Right.
Even if it loses, well, I guess they're on behalf of all spread. So it's different from Teravangian in that regard. But at least the like, I'm going to survive, not win, like is kind of a Teravangian theme.
Yeah.
So what do you think of that? The as a whole of this chapter, you were asking Eliot earlier, like, what should Adolin say here? And whenever I was reading this or listening to this, like, whenever these questions were posed, I was like, I don't ask me to answer this. I don't. That's all you. And this is why I kind of chose my word of shoes, or Adolin kind of starting to fill the shoes of his father. Kind of stained in his image. Is I think he does such a good job, and that's well written, and that's scenes like this are where a show or a book or a movie or whatever goes from a good story to like really well written, because stuff like this is like, especially if it stumps the reader, it stumped me. It may not have stumped all of y'all, but the responses that Adolin gives are very thoughtful and very good, and I could just imagine like the pressure I feel like that you would have as the writer of that dialogue is pretty tense.
Brandon Sanderson has an entire lecture on how to write characters that are smarter than you are. It's a funny content piece. Witness number 3. We know who this is. This is Nodum, the captain of the ship from last book, Oathbringer, who lets them go at the end of Oathbringer and lets them go to Thalen City. Was that where they're? Anyway,
I think so.
And he lets them go, and for that he is exiled. That we find that out later or earlier in this book. He's exiled from Lasting Integrity. He shows back up in this chapter in uniform, which means he has been reinstated, and he has a pre-written script that he pulls out from his pockets that he's supposed to be reading from. And he starts reading it, and it's like, I have been asked to bear witness against these terrible humans that like were insubordinate on my ship or whatever. And then he stops, meets Adolin's gaze with his eyes, puts the paper down, and says, "Honor is not dead so long as he lives in the hearts of men." Which apparently is a buzz phrase for the honor spren, because everybody like erupts in support of that phrase or opposition to that phrase, and all the guards rush everybody out of the courtroom. And Adolin, for a second there, like pulls his sword. He thinks he's about to like get rushed on the floor for that word. And Nodum says, and Nodum is dragged out of the forum square, still saying that phrase and yelling that phrase to try to rally support for the phrase. What do you guys think of honor is not dead so long as he lives in the hearts of men?
Intriguing statement. I find it a pretty cool sounding one. I'm trying to imagine what the like political debate might be amongst the spren that this clearly is so divisive, and it seems like maybe this is right in on the topic that Adolin is trying to argue about. He's trying to argue that humans have an honor in them and are worth fighting with. And the honor sprenner is trying to say, nope, they're not perfect, so we should not bond with them. But to say it this way, honor is not dead so long as he lives in the hearts of men. That's a cool idea, that if men can live up to or attempt to live up to honor, can they carry on his legacy? Can they carry on what honor was meant to do here on Roshar in themselves? It's an interesting thought.
So we've had spren defined as slivers of, or at least honor spren defined as slivers of honor himself.
Right.
And so the honor spren at this point are redefining honor for themselves because honor is dead. So honor is whatever I make it to be, or we make it to be as a culture, because we are all that's left of honor. But this phrase, this is me assuming that this is a long debate between like honor spren of, if we all collectively live up to or try to strive for what honor was, collectively we can recombine and preserve honor for what he was when he was alive. So if we put our faith back in men and men still strive for honor, we don't have to redefine honor, and honor is not dead.
It's a cool thought that could, be pretty important. I also noticed, did you guys notice the effect it has on Kalek?
Yes.
He like shrivels up. It like has a physical effect on him. This statement, it's like he starts to panic. It like has an anxiety attack almost.
I did. I wonder if that's a trigger for him because he has long ago surrendered to not fighting anymore. And even the thought of we could still win this war is that anxious for him, so that he just cannot handle it and has an anxiety attack, as you said. So even the idea, even the argument of we can still win this war, there is still hope, I think is the message behind this phrase. Really gets to Kalak.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because we saw before he straight up told somebody,
Adolin,
Shalon, one of them. He's like, yeah, basically my game plan is just to get off this planet. I'm just trying to get away, whatever it takes for me to get away. And so that fits perfectly with he's completely given up hope. And so for there to be a possibility of hope coming back, yeah, he'd have to admit that his game plan is completely wrong.
right?
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. We'll see where this goes, because the Adolin section kind of ends there. For this chapter, Adolin says, well, that went fairly well for me. And Kalak comes back with, yeah, but it doesn't really matter, dude. I mean, this whole thing is a farce. You've been told that over and over. And even if I judge in your favor, you still might lose a lot of spread to odium, is the truth that he throws at Adolin. And then we end the chapter with a very strange out of context scene from Shalon Vale Radiant. And she's climbing a tree. She's trying to reach the zero gravity zone of the lasting integrity, or at least that's what she's claiming. Falls out of the tree, quote unquote. All of this is just to get access to Stormlight, because she knows that the Honor Spread will try to save her with Stormlight. And she swipes a full, perfect Stormlight sphere out of the vault. And the Honor Spread say she hides it by so they think that she's absorbed all of it, but they tell her that was years worth of Stormlight. That because the sphere is perfect and never leaks out, they can keep charging it and keep charging it full of investiture. And she steals it. So she just stole with one sphere a lot of Stormlight, so that she can use that now, because that's been our choke point for Radiance in Shadesmar, as there's no Stormlight. But having a sphere that never leaks, completely full of years worth of Stormlight, Shalon just successfully stole.
Enough to sustain a light weaving of a herald, perhaps?
Perhaps. Which, yeah, would probably debunk your theory of is she already Kalak, because she probably wouldn't have the Stormlight to support that.
That probably would, huh? Like, she didn't have any Stormlight before this, right? So how would she have done that? Good point.
Unless she gets a magic telegram Stormlight sphere from Maraise through the magic box.
Maybe.
Anything else for this episode, gentlemen?
I think that was enough. A lot to chew on.
There's a lot of different things happening at the moment. It's
Yes.
tough to cover.
Sure.
Thank you for joining me, Paul and Eliot. We reconvene next week.
See ya.
Bye.